double album. It actually looks cooler from behind, mainly because it makes the O from the Periphery, but of course, turning your hands and making it happen while live is a bit of a difficulty. Juggernaut Alpha and Omega from Periphery. We're actually going to talk about this as one, as opposed to most Devin Townsend records or other double albums of the variety where we usually split it up. Mainly because a lot of the other double albums that we speak about either come as two parts that occur during two different parts of the year or portions of the year. Either that or, in the case of Devin Townsend, both discs of the album actually represent a really different idea by comparison. This is meant to be exactly as it appears, a very lengthy double album that does have a conceptual theme behind it. One that was actually started within the band in individual tracks such as Icarus Lives or Jetpack Says Yes, something that the band really wanted to kind of bring everything together and make it into a monstrous piece, one that was actually designed to come out a lot more quickly after the release of Periphery 2 back in 2012. However, with the touring schedule and doing the Clear EP idea and things such as that variety, it just didn't happen until 2014 with the eventual release here in 2015. So we have 17 tracks that are dedicated to this idea, and whenever you think about how many tracks were on Periphery Part 2, you can kind of understand that separating this was kind of a bit important, but at the same time, something that they decided to do. What I'm very surprised that Periphery did was divide this into two albums that you have to actually purchase individually. I'm assuming that there have been some varieties of this where that has not been the case, where you can get both together. However, I definitely expected to see this as a double album pack as opposed to two things that I had to, for example, buy individually, but it was worth it. So let's talk about this album. Let's talk about Periphery. There was a lot that I had said in my Periphery 2 review back in 2012, a lot of things that I mentioned about the band, a lot of things that I thought were very good and going in the right direction, and a lot of things that kind of felt like they would fallen off a little bit. But the Clear EP really settled a lot of different things. It showcased, and very importantly showcased, that this is a band that easily could use their different and wide array of influences to really craft a sound that was going to sound perhaps a little bit different on each album, or it could be leaps and bounds different. So this is a group that I think by the time their career is all said and done is not necessarily going to just be lumped into one category. Now, with Juggernaut, this definitely is a much more focused, a much more concerted effort. So this is one where they're going to be really trying to stay within a certain cycle of theme. It's not one where they're going to aim for the same amount of diversity that you saw on an EP such as Clear. Now, we also said during the 2 album, the Periphery 2, This One's Gonna Hurt album review, that this is definitely a launch point. This is one that was going to really take them places, one where it could end up being a sleeper hit where you start to see and hear Periphery on the radio. Now, it's not something where I heard them on my local radio station, but I do believe they have started to get a lot more airplay on XM or satellite radio on shows such as Octane and things like that. So let's talk about this album. Let's talk about this interesting conceptual piece. Whenever it comes to themes and whenever it comes to actual story, that's what we're kind of avoiding. That's kind of left for you to dictate. That's not for me to represent to you. It's instead my job to talk about the music. The music definitely feels like it has a lot less of the gentisms or the gent style that perhaps Periphery was associated with their first 2 releases. It's almost like the Clear EP helped them shed those wings a little bit and instead kind of metamorphosize into a band that really just is trying to showcase themselves as a little bit more of a straightforward rock/heavy metal band that does have teetering influences with progressive metal, with still the gent scene just a little bit, but definitely one that really just borders on experimentation. Now, the first band that really came to mind a little bit whenever I thought about this and whenever I thought about this idea is actually Coheed and Cambria, which a lot of people will say is unfair and probably would hate that, almost like Steven Wilson hates to be compared to Roger Waters and the Boys and Pink Floyd, but it's definitely one that comes to mind considering the Afterman ascension and descension cycle that we just got through with Coheed and Cambria. Alpha and Omega, ascension, descension, polar opposites, endpoints that all come together to form a whole. So there you go. Perhaps that's the only way in which the similarities truly do occur. But at the same time, Musically, it definitely bears a little bit of resemblance as well, considering this is going a little bit more, and leaning at times a little bit more toward the, what I would consider progressive alternative department. This is one where they definitely have fantastic musicianship. They still have the capability of writing some really, really solid material, but it's one that definitely seems to be teetering a little bit among being in that heavy metal category and one that's more on the alternative category. And it works for this album actually pretty well. It's one where it's able to tell this story and not really feel like it's veering too far off course. This is also one where you're hearing a lot more in the way of clean singing as opposed to the gruff vocals that you would hear perhaps on some tracks in Periphery 2 or on the original album. So this is one where you see more of a focus on the clean singing, and you only hear the growls when the band really deems necessary. What's kind of interesting about this also is the off-settling, off-balance kilter of the way in which these albums are kind of represented. We have 10 tracks on Alpha, we have only 7 on Omega for a total of 17 new tracks. However, on Alpha we see 10 tracks that are moderately length, ones that will range anywhere from 2 to 5.5 minutes as a maximum. Whereas on Omega, we hear and see longer tracks. We see tracks that are eclipsing that 5-minute range with ease, including one that eclipses 11 minutes, another one that eclipses 7 minutes. So it's one where the overall time is balanced out very well. However, the number of songs, the representation is not balanced very well. Is that a bad thing? Is that a good thing? We'll get there. What I really like about this, and the one thing that I will certainly, I guess perhaps repeat, is I like the whole way in which the theme is kind of wrapped together. I like how they're able to keep themselves kind of composed and under control for a majority of this album. They're able to do that by really maintaining a certain structure, maintaining a certain balance, a certain limitation for themselves. That way they don't get way too far off balance as to what they're trying to represent with this Juggernaut cycle. Almost as though they're trying to take some of the core ideas from the original songs that this cycle was meant to sort of create or birth and use it in order to factor around a gigantic theme and a gigantic album idea, which is exactly what they've done. So that's something that's been very well maintained. Where I do think that their weakness is the fact that they do still find and feel like they need to incorporate chaos very musically through some very dissonant sounds. Some very dissonant sounds that have become incorporated with the gent genre or this new plight of bands that have been coming around that have been sort of feeling that dissonance needs to be acquired in order to really showcase and articulate chaos, which is understandable, but is something that also can come off as a bit really off-putting. It's one that actually can cause you to skip perhaps a key portion or a key element to your story as opposed to staying focused on the narrative. And this is one that's really kind of evident very quickly in Alpha, in I believe the 4th or 5th track, where it just really seems to descend into just absolute dissonant chaos. One where it just doesn't even have an ear appeal, even if there is some sort of theme that really essentially associated with this, even if it would be to really juxtapose Armageddon or juxtapose a huge battle. It's definitely one where the chaotic element was, I feel, a bit misrepresented here musically. But once again, you have to also offset that by stating that they have a great, talented core of musicians that are able to actually come up with this stuff, that actually are able to really factor in this stuff and really have the imagination in order to develop these ideas and make chaos somewhat accessible. So they definitely were able to at least do that. So that's my way of kind of offsetting my negative take with a little bit of a positive spin. It's a weird yin-yang effect. I don't know, maybe I should move to China. Fuck it. But at any rate, this is certainly an element where it can feel a bit off-kilter. It can feel as though they had this great theme that was building. They had this great sort of songwriting niche that they had fallen into, and they kind of broke out of it, which some would encourage, but it doesn't feel as though it was the right way to go. The album is really one that is hyped to be magnificent. Whenever you consider a dual album affair like this, whenever you consider a double album with a central theme, you expect big things, and I feel as though that in spite of the great musicianship, in spite of the focus, this is an album that just doesn't reach that magnificent plane. It does many things right. It is able to really showcase the difference between Alpha and Omega. It's able to showcase that Alpha is a little bit more straightforward, a little bit more based around the story, whereas Omega is telling a lot more with a lot less. It's one where more the musical guidance is where it's at. But it's one that just doesn't feel like it totally 100% delivers. It doesn't totally 100% captivate. It's one where you can very quickly lose yourself in, but also get lost out of it. You know, basically find yourself kind of admiring other things. It doesn't grip quite in the same way as perhaps Z2 grips. It doesn't maintain your full attention at all times. And that's a bit of a problem. That's a problematic element to this. It's one that I noticed a little bit more in Alpha than I did with Omega. I'm sure with some people that may be flip-flopped or didn't happen at all, or happened with both discs. But it is something that's present. It just feels as though it was not fully 100% stunning. It was something where, musically speaking, they did some great things. They made some great leaps. However, it wasn't far enough. Either that, or it's something where, since this is kind of new ground, where they've only developed just songs, as opposed to full ideas like this before, it just feels a bit, it's a bit underwhelming. It's a kind of a hard idea to explain. Overall, though, I would probably give Alpha a 73, and I'd probably give Omega a 79. So we would even out at about a 76. It's odd that we do this, considering I do remember that for Periphery 2, I gave scores for two sides of the album, of a single disc album, and that one was better than the other. Almost as though this is a band that's able to really do some things right, and really, you know, write some very powerful and very, very gripping music, but it only happens half the time. That's in no way an insult. This is not easy stuff to do. If you think that you're going to be able to pick up a guitar and do something better than them, good luck, have fun, and Godspeed. I know I couldn't. I review the stuff because I care about music. I'm passionate about it. And I would like to see great things from every band that I review, even the ones that I talk trash on. I'd still like to hear something fantastic from them. Overall, though, fans of Periphery will probably feel like they have just reached the monumental nirvana of Peripherydom, because they have two albums that they can dive into. They have themes that they can examine. They can delve into the whole concept and try to determine what it's all about, and try to determine what it all means. But for somebody who's merely kind of on the outside as a fan, one that enjoys them but isn't obsessed with them, it's an album that just doesn't deliver on all cylinders. It's one that certainly feels like it falls just a bit short. What did you guys think about this album? I want to know, because this is one that I think is going to be talked about a fair amount within the next couple of weeks. What is your opinion about Alpha and Omega? These two albums that we have, well, trying to do this right here, from Periphery. Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't joined the Facebook group yet, you should definitely do that. So anyway, what do you guys think? Overall, 76 out of 100 here. But I want to know what your score is out of 100. Let me know.